I am delighted to be a distinguished keynote speaker at the virtual summit of the 23rd edition of the Bangalore Technical Summit with the theme Next is Now. I am thankful to Dr. E.V. Ramana Reddy, Additional Chief Secretary, Government of Karnataka, for this privilege extended to the government to me. This summit brings together the world's best minds who share their vision, forecast the future, unravel innovative products, and startups with out-of-box thinking. With participation of more than 5,000 business delegates and addressed by 250 distinguished speakers, this summit certainly is one of its kind. I've been asked by Dr. Ramana Reddy to speak on the National Education Policy 2020, which has been recently adopted by the Government of India as the key step towards transforming the education of our country to align it with the 21st century needs and imperatives. In the next 30 minutes or so, I shall briefly outline the basic main elements of the National Education Policy 2020, encompassing school education, higher education, including professional and vocational education. I use this opportunity to thank the Honorable Chief Minister as well as the Honorable Minister of Education for this very specialized privilege that they have extended to me to be a participant in an all-important summit that you are conducting. India, over the next decade, will have the highest population of young people in the world. More than 50% below 50 years of age, 35 years of age, aspiring for high-quality education. This demographic dividend has to be taken advantage of, and globalization and demands of a knowledge economy and knowledge society call for emphasis on the need for acquisition of new skills by learners on a regular basis for them to learn how to learn and become lifelong learners, a critical consideration that needs to be addressed appropriately. The changes in knowledge landscape, especially science and technology advances like big data analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence, all demand skilled workforce involving mathematics, computer science, data science, as well as multidisciplinary abilities across the sciences, social sciences, and humanities. Further, the education of the future needs to be reconfigured in order to meet the goals of Global Education Development Agenda, the Goal 4 of the Sustainable Development Goals of 2020 that seeks to ensure inclusion and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. With its last education policy formulated nearly 30 years ago, India now needs an educational system aligned with aspirational goals of the 21st century education while remaining rooted to India's value systems and ethos. The vision of the new educational policy has been crafted to ensure that it touches the life of each and every citizen consistent with their needs and necessities, besides creating a just and equitable society. NEP 2020 provides an integrated yet flexible approach to education. Further, it has kept the interconnectedness of the various phases of education in mind and how the same will enable continuity, coherence, and processes to ultimately realize an end-to-end educational roadmap for the country. An articulation of a broad view of education encompassing holistic development with special emphasis on kindling of the creative potential of each individual in all its richness and complexity has grown increasingly popular in recent years. The policy thus aims at the development of the 21st century skills for the students, giving enough flexibility in making choices. The policy has recommended transformative changes in the way the school education needs to be reconfigured. In the contemporary times, advances in developmental, cognitive, and educational psychology have considerably influenced our thinking about how we need to address the teaching learning processes of the youngsters in their early childhood. Thus, the change from the 10 plus 2 design to an expanded 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 structure is based on our better understanding of the scientific basis, which provides insights of the child's learning trajectory from birth to secondary school. Between the ages of 3 to 14, children gradually transition from perceptual learning to conceptual learning and then on to prescriptive learning and abstraction. From the age of 3 to the age of 14, recognizing the developmental trajectory of the child, school education is structured as foundational, primary, and middle in conformity with the above mentioned characteristics of the evolution of the child's learning ability. The distinction between curricular and extracurricular and co-curricular, arts and science and vocational subjects are done away with. In other words, education at this stage is holistic. The final secondary school level, that is the 4-year stage from the age of 15 to 18, is when students explore their interests and strengths. Critically, the policy calls for exposure to vocational education at this stage so that students are fully prepared to decide at the end of 15 years whether they will pursue vocational profession or higher education. The policy recommends mastery of at least one vocational subject during this period. A schooling system that respects these natural development phases of a child will prepare our students far better for higher education or professional and vocational careers. The policy recognizes teachers as the torch bearers of change, that is, teachers at the center of education. Some may find this principle puzzling because we are all aware of the importance of child-centric education. The teacher being at the center of education and the child-centric education are not in contradiction or in conflict. In fact, we cannot have child-centric education without having teacher at the center of education. The policy takes a comprehensive view and actions to restore teachers to their rightful high status in the society. Additionally, the policy calls for a complete overhaul of our teacher education system, which is one of the crucial connections between higher education and school education. As envisaged in the policy, school teacher education being made part of the higher educational institutions immediately not only raises the stature of school teachers by placing their profession at par with other options for graduates, but it also recognizes that only the higher education system can provide school teachers with a knowledge base broad enough and deep enough to strengthen our schooling systems. Coming to the higher education, the two important policy shifts envisaged at the undergraduate level are the emphasis on multidisciplinarity and holistic approach to education and the 4-year degree program. The policy aims to promote holistic and multidisciplinary education at the undergraduate level to generate more imagination and creativity in the students to ensure their all-rounded development. This holistic nature of education, also called as liberal education in contemporary discussions, traces its origin to the age-old idea of liberal arts discussed almost 1400 years ago in the classical Indian texts on education, like Banabhatta's Kadambari, whereas a truly educated person was described as one who had mastered all the 64 kalas. The kalas here encompass music, dance, painting, sculpture, languages, and literature, in addition to the subjects of science, engineering, and mathematics, as well as vocational subjects. In a similar perspective, Albert Einstein once said, and I quote, all religions, arts, and sciences are branches from the same tree. This holistic view of all human knowledge and inquiry as fundamentally connected and is reflected in the history of higher education to the present day. This view holds that a broad and interwoven education is essential to the preparation of citizens for life, work, and civic participation. Even though there is a preponderance of graduate programs that focus on single or sub-discipline, there is an emergence of interdisciplinary graduate programs that many institutions working to promote greater interdisciplinarity in graduate training and scholarship. It's also interesting to note the established integrative fields such as science, technology, and society, sustainability, women studies, human computer interaction, bioethics, and many others offer models of successful integrative graduate program. In this specific context, I would like to bring in the importance of the knowledge related to arts, crafts, architecture, and aesthetics as a part of science and engineering education through a very interesting example. It's often lamented that India produces very competent scientists and engineers, but falls short of being great innovators. Steve Jobs, founder of Apple, famous for his ideas, was asked on what makes his product successful. According to him, the secret was to bring top-notch aesthetics with top-notch science and engineering. He himself is known to have said about why the Macintosh computer revolutionized computing, and I quote, I think part of what made the Macintosh great was that the people working on it were musicians and poets and artists and zoologists and historians who also happened to be the best computer scientists in the world. As a crucial step to lead India into the 21st century and the fourth industrial revolution, multidisciplinary education is central. Even engineering schools such as IITs will move towards more holistic, multidisciplinary education with more arts and humanities, while arts and humanities students will aim to learn more science, while all will make an effort to incorporate more vocational subjects and soft skills. India's rich legacy in the arts as well as in the sciences and beyond will significantly help in making the move toward such an education an easy and natural transition. There have been evidences that certain kinds of outcomes associated with certain integrative approaches in higher education, including written and oral communication skills, ethical decision making, critical thinking, and the ability to apply knowledge in real world settings are all the type of educational outcomes that many jobs demand today. Job seekers have been often faced with demands that go beyond deep technical expertise or familiarity with particular technology. There is a search for well rounded individuals with holistic education who can take on complex problems and understand the needs, desires, and motivations of others through integration of learning across disciplines. Thus, the notion of a knowledge of many arts or just liberal arts is being brought back to Indian education because it is exactly the kind of education that is required for the 21st century. Reverting back to the undergraduate education, within the framework of the above consideration, the policy envisages the degree will be either a 3 or 4 year duration with multiple exit options within this period with appropriate certifications. The 4 year program will provide students with opportunities to fully experience the impact of a holistic and multidisciplinary aspect of undergraduate education, which aims to develop all capacities, not just intellectual, but aesthetic, social, physical, emotional, and moral capacities in an integrated manner. This policy takes a firm view that vocational education must be integrated within undergraduate education. Not only is this consistent with the principles of holistic development, but it gives students an avenue into the world of work that will be increasingly important in the 21st century. I want to clearly emphasize this point because we tend to have a very narrow conception of vocational education and we therefore undervalue it. With advances in technologies such as artificial intelligence and augmented reality, We clearly foresee an increasing number of hybrid jobs where a human's vocational skills will complement the capabilities of high-tech equipment. The higher education system is therefore necessary to prepare students for such jobs. Vocational education will thus become an integral part of the larger vision of liberal education. Taking the strategy further towards integrating professional education with general education, the policy aims to take a holistic approach to the preparation of professionals by ensuring broad-based competencies, an understanding of the social human context, a strong ethical compass, in addition to the highest quality professional capacities. Thus, it is envisaged all institutions offering either professional or general education must organically evolve into multidisciplinary institutions by offering both by 2030. In a nutshell, the overall higher education sector will aim to be an integrated higher education system, including professional and vocational education. Thus, this approach will be applicable to all higher educational institutions across current streams, which will eventually merge into one coherent ecosystem of higher education. As India aspires to grow and sustain a large and vibrant economy and uplifting its society, one of the key elements to its successful realization is to have a robust ecosystem of research and innovation. The present inadequacies in this context are very much evident through the low number of researchers in India per lakh of population, which is only 15 compared to 423 in US or 825 in Israel, with all its attendant impacts on publications, patent applications, and industrial growth involving indigenous technologies. The policy also highlights the critical need to better manage research at all levels. Pure research, applied research, translational research, and research to address specific needs of industry, social problems, strategic demands, and many such requirements. In order to seed, nurture, grow, and transform universities into full-fledged research centers of excellence, the NEP 2020 has recommended the creation of National Research Foundation, NRF. NRF's primary role will be to nurture a vibrant research ecosystem through adequate funding, mentoring, and careful monitoring. The funding support from NRF will be available to both publicly and privately funded institutions without any distinction. NRF will support multidisciplinary research in the arts and humanities, social sciences, sciences and mathematics, engineering and technology, including educational technology. In fact, educational technology research must play a crucial role not only in achieving a higher gross enrollment ratio, which the policy recommends at 50% level by 2035, by improving access to quality higher education, but in improving the resilience of the entire educational system from disruptions such as the one we are facing today. In this regard, NRF will work closely with the National Educational Technology Forum, NETF, a new autonomous entity recommended in the policy, which will provide a platform for crucial dialogue between educators and educational technology entrepreneurs. Educational Technology Forum will be a highly deliberative body that will distinguish between genuine disruption and mere hype, because we will certainly see a lot of the latter. The policy has paid special attention to the promotion of Indian languages, arts, and culture. Needless to emphasize, India is a treasure trove of culture developed over thousands of years and manifested in the form of arts, works of literature, customs, traditions, linguistic expressions, heritage sites, and so on. The promotion of Indian arts and culture is both important at the national and individual level. Language, of course, is inextricably linked to art and sculpture and is the key to preserve and promote culture. Unfortunately, Indian languages have not received their due attention and care, with the country losing 220 languages in the last 50 years itself. Further, even those languages of India not officially on endangered list, such as the 22 languages of the 8th schedule, are facing difficulties. The policy therefore recommends learning and teaching of Indian languages by integrating with school and higher education. The policy recommends developing and teaching many courses that cover early implementation of the three-language formula to promote multilingualism, conducting more experiential language learning, hiring of outstanding local artists, and flexibility for students to choose the ideal balance between courses for themselves to develop their own creativity. The policy thus recommends strong departments and programs in Indian languages, comparative literature, creative writing, arts, music, philosophy, etc., throughout the country. Degrees, including 4-year BEd dual degrees, will be developed. Policy recommends that more higher educational institutions and more programs in higher education to use the mother tongue or local language as a medium of instruction. Another recommendation is to develop high quality programs and degrees in translation and interpretation, arts and museum administration, archaeology, graphic design and web design within higher education system. The policy recommends mainstreaming Sanskrit with strong offerings in school as well as in higher education. Innovatively, it can be connected to other contemporary and relevant subjects such as mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, linguistics, dramatics, yoga, etc. The Department of Sanskrit that conduct teaching and outstanding interdisciplinary work on Sanskrit and Sanskrit knowledge system need to be established. Under this policy, a light but tight mechanism for regulation is envisaged, applicable without distinction between private and public institutions. This provides a more cohesive structure for the higher education institutions in the context of teaching and research, ensuring increased autonomy and empowered governance and effective leadership. The present political system, under the visionary leadership of the Honorable Prime Minister, has unambiguously declared that no efforts will be spared to implement this policy with all its multiple dimensions. It's up to all of us, both at the individual and collective levels, to ensure that India makes smooth and rapid progress as it re-establishes itself as a knowledge powerhouse. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Firoz, and I'm the Senior Vice President and Head of SAP Academy for Engineering, and I'm based out of the Silicon Valley in California. Firstly, I want to say it's an absolute honor to be part of the Bengaluru Tech Summit 2002. As is with every event, this is a virtual event, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share my thoughts about the future of learning in a post-COVID world. Let me start by saying that on a very personal note, this is a very special event for me. I've been very closely involved with the Bangalore Tech Summit almost since a decade, when I was actually based out of Bangalore. And I've been now very fortunate to be part of the advisory board for the Technology Summit. Let me start by sharing a little bit about what does learning look like in the post-COVID world, and what are the fundamental shifts that we are seeing and how it affects all of us. To start with, it's pretty evident that the most important quality that is relevant today is the ability to be a lifelong learner. And the reason is pretty simple. There are so many changes that are happening around us that is very difficult to predict what are the skills that you need in the future. It's almost impossible to know what are the jobs that will remain, what are the kind of roles that will need, because technology is changing at such a fast pace that it's almost impossible to predict what the needs are. And so the only constant that we have is our ability to learn as we go. So what you knew maybe a year back may be completely irrelevant today. And hence, it is extremely important that all of us embrace the idea of being a lifelong learner if you have to be relevant in today's fast changing, what I call as the hyper VUCA times. We always used to say that we live in VUCA times, which is highly volatile, highly, unorganized, ubiquitous, and highly unknown in many ways, and very complex and ambiguous. So that's what VUCA stands for. And we live in actually a hyper VUCA world. It's not just a VUCA world, it's a hyper VUCA world. And the pandemic has actually brought upon us that massive shift that is happening. So the big question to all of us is, how do you remain a lifelong learner? And the big question is, what are the core principles that we need to embrace in the COVID times and also in the post-COVID times? Let me start by sharing 2 or 3 fundamental shifts that we have seen that has happened, especially in the way we learn. What we've seen is that today learning can happen from anywhere. It can happen on a campus, inside a room, or it can happen outside a campus. It can happen virtually from anywhere. It can happen online, it can happen offline. So learning can happen from anywhere, and as of today, most learning is happening from our bedrooms, which we never thought would ever be the case. The second shift that we are seeing, and this is compared to the way we learned it. The way we learned it was that we used to first go to a school or go to a university and learn there and apply that, what we've learned, either in the form of projects or in the form of what we used to call as homeworks, or we can always go learn by doing things outside the campus or outside the rooms or outside the offices. And what you're seeing is a complete inversion of that, which means that actually, because there is so much of content out there, most of the learning can happen on your own. You don't have to go to a classroom, you don't have to go to university, you don't have to go to an office to learn. You can actually learn on yourself from wherever you want. But the key is that you go to a campus, you go to a college, you go to an office to really practice what you've learned. And so we have seen a massive inversion from learning by going to a physical space and then practicing it outside. Now it's the other way around, that you can learn on your own from wherever you want, but for real practice, for real engagement, for real projects, you actually go to the campus or you go to your office work. The other thing that we have seen, and this is a classic example, to record this, I had to spend an hour to set up the things in the room, to have the right lighting, to make sure that my camera is at the right place. In many ways, I have become a producer of content more than what I'm saying. Of course, what I'm saying is important, but what has become even more important is that you have in many ways become a producer, director of your own content. And this has never happened before, right? I mean, we always had support systems and help, but during COVID times, you have to do everything yourself. So production of the content has also become your responsibility, not just delivering the content. What I would like to say is basically take you through 6 core principles, which I think are fundamental to learning in a post-COVID world. And let me share what these 6 principles are. The first principle is that what I call that focus on the discovery, not so much on the recovery. And what do I mean by that? The COVID situation has actually provided us with nothing as a blueprint as to how to handle this. The last time we had a pandemic of this scale was in 1918. So you can imagine that there is no blueprint available. Nobody knows how to handle this. So what I say is that focus on the discovery. You're not going to get it right, but make sure that you try new ways to reach out and learn yourself. So instead of saying, I will go back to a pre-COVID world, the pre-COVID world is not coming back. So let's be clear that focusing on discovery and finding out new ways to make the most of the situation that you are in is an integral part of surviving and learning and becoming a lifelong learner in a post-COVID world. So this is the first thing that I think everybody needs to understand. The second important aspect, and this is very critical, what you've seen during COVID, and this is across all platforms, is that there has been a massive exponential increase of digital content. And there's a beautiful saying that when there is a wealth of content, there is a poverty of attention. I must say that on personally, I have done more talks than ever before, because now it's just easy. You can do a keynote sitting in your room. I've been doing like 3 or 4 keynotes and webinars and podcasts every week. But the reality is there is an exponential increase in content. So the big question is, how do you get to people's attention? Creating content is not the problem anymore, but creating content that can hold people's attention becomes an integral part. Now, so I'm saying that instead of focusing only on the content, focus on attention. While the content is important, focusing on getting the attention of the audience becomes even more important than ever before. So that's the second point. Third important aspect. If you look at learning, a majority of the learning used to happen informally, which means that if you're in a conference, you bump into some random people and you learn something from those peoples, right? Or when you are in a meeting, you do a lot of conversations, what we call as the side talks, or on the coffee corners or the corridors. And I call it the corridor effect. A lot of the learning is not happening just by the formal means, but by the informal means as well. So the big question is, in a fully digital world, how do you create these so-called corridor effects where you can learn through these serendipitous, informal bumping together of friends and on the informal ways? And today in a digital world, that kind of learning becomes very hard. And I think we'll have to figure out new ways where learning can also happen by these informal corridor effects. So the big question is, can we recreate these corridor effects in a digital world? I think some tools have tried to do that, but my personal take is it's very, very hard to do that. There are now certain virtual campuses that are created, so you can actually sit in an auditorium and you can actually feel that there are people sitting next to each other whom you don't know. You can talk to them. So there are some tools where they've tried to create these so-called corridor effects, where you can have an informal conversation and can learn from each other. So that's basically something which I think is still uncharted territories, but some companies have managed to do that. But we'll have to see how that evolves. I feel that being able to convert these informal learning means is also super critical in terms of the future of learning. Now let me share with you what are the other so these are the top 3 principles. Now let me talk to you about the 4th key principle, and here is what we call as rapid experimentation. What do I mean by that? Our core hypothesis is that true mastery happens only by practice. Now the big question is, how do you practice in a virtual world? You don't become Roger Federer by playing tennis once a week. You don't become Santana by playing the guitar once a week. You have to practice it over and over again if you want to have any form of mastery in any skill that you want to have. Now the big question is, how do you do mastery in a virtual world? And our belief is that it happens by giving short spurts of input through an expert, and then you kind of try to do it yourself. So the role of a teacher, the role of a professor, the role of a project manager is basically to be available as a guide, but your job is to keep experimenting over and over again. So I think it's very, very important to understand that one way of learning is what I call as rapid experimentation. And in today's world, you don't know how you're going to learn. So you have to constantly experiment if you want to learn in your ways. The fifth important aspect is what I call as purpose-driven projects. What we've realized is that it is very difficult to hold people's attention in a virtual world. So you may be present digitally, but you may be doing something else. The only way you can attract people to do and work and learn is to give something that is super interesting for them, is to give something that is deeply embedded in core purpose. And how do we do that? I always say identify projects which touch the people's heart. Once you are able to identify a project which touches people's heart, I think you will be able to inspire people to learn and contribute in a meaningful manner. So identifying projects which are deeply embedded in purpose is extremely important to have the learner being deeply engaged. The fourth aspect is really about how do you manage the cognitive load. It is pretty clear that there is a massive amount of cognitive load because when you are doing everything in two-dimensional, your attention, your focus is so high that it drains your brain. In fact, there's a lot of studies that talks about being zombied because we are all so much in Zoom meetings, or what we call as Zoom fatigue. There are days when I feel extremely tired because I have spent 3 to 4 hours just being on Zoom or just being on a webinar. Basically, what has happened is a lot of things we used to gather because we were looking at three-dimensional, we were getting three-dimensional inputs. In a digital world, most of the inputs that are coming to you are in two-dimensional in a screen. And your eyes are focusing on very small elements and you're not looking at the big picture. So the ability to manage cognitive overload becomes incredibly important. So it's pretty clear that you can't be sitting and on a digital in front of your laptop for 6 hours straight. You could still do it when you are in a physical classroom or in an office environment. But today in a digital environment, what you need to do is to manage your cognitive overload. And how do you manage your cognitive overload? I think it can only be done by giving enough breaks. Don't do anything for more than 35 minutes. We've seen that 90 minutes is the maximum. Don't go beyond that at all. But even when you are doing a lecture, make sure that you are doing it for shorter sprints and give enough break time. And finally, I think the way we are fundamentally going to learn and the role of a professor, the role of a teacher, the role of a manager has completely changed. The way we see that in the past, the power when it comes to learning was with the teacher. The power was with the person who's delivering the content. Today, the power is now shifted to the learner. So learner can decide how he wants to learn. You can't control it. He can learn it online, he can learn it offline, he can learn it in the class, he can learn it at home. He can learn from whatever ways he wants to do. So the power is back into the learner's hands. What really matters is how does the role of a person who's delivering the content, he's only there to clarify and guide you. So you can learn on your own, but once in a while you need to touch base with the expert so that you clearly understand how certain things are done, and if you have any doubts, you clarify them. So I think that's super critical, is to really, there's a complete inversion of power dynamics. So it's not it's not the teacher who is delivering the content who's powerful, but it is the learner, because he now can decide how he wants to learn. So these are basically the 6 principles. Let me go through it once again. First, focus on discovery, not so much on recovery. Second, you should craft for attention and not just for content. The third, what I call as recreate the corridor effect. The fourth is manage the cognitive overload. Fifth is to really have purpose, driven projects. and then have rapid experimentation. And so these are the things that you have to keep in mind. I'm not saying one is more important than the other, so you can do it in any order. All these 6 principles are super critical. Our learning, and this is again, what we spent a lot of time researching and understanding this, especially in the last 8 to 9 months, has that if you keep this in mind, learning becomes much more meaningful, especially in a fully digital world. Finally, I want to leave by kind of sharing a few points, because we don't know what the future would look like. I think there is a lot of people are saying that we don't need office spaces, we don't need in-person meetings, and learning will not happen in person anymore. I think that is a massive oversimplification of how learning happens. I think learning requires in-person interaction. I don't think that is ever going to go away. We are a social being. We need human connection. Unfortunately, in these times, all the learning is digital. There is not much of physical interaction happening. But my core belief is that in a world which is post-COVID, or as and when we know how to deal and live with the situation, I think we will go back to some form of physical interaction. But a majority will still remain online or digital, but you will still come together, whether it's a physical office, whether it's a coffee corner, whether it is informal gatherings. There will be a need for in-person learning to happen. And so those are the key things that we should keep in mind. But I'll go back to what I started with. Being a lifelong learner is by far the most important skill that you need. It's not about learning a specific skill, but it's having a mindset where you are always agile, where you're always curious, where you're always learning. I think that is the most important aspect that will keep you relevant in these massively uncertain times. As I said, these are hyper VUCA times, and for us to be relevant in these times, this is extremely important. With that, I hope you find this insights useful. If you have any questions, feel free to write to me at feroze.v.r@sap.com. It's FEROSE.v.r@sap.com. I hope all of you enjoy this virtual summit. I know this is a little odd, but we live in interesting times. 2020 has been by far the most unexpected and most interesting year of, I think, in our entire lifetimes. But I hope the Bangalore Tech Summit is useful for all of you. And I look forward to being in touch with all of you. All the best and take care.